Hey, folks. Good afternoon.
Howdy.
Hey.
Hello.
How's everyone?
Good.
Good.
Peter, I'm not sure what we're going to do with our Friday afternoons from now on.
You know, you're going to have to solve that problem without me. We just can't do this every Friday.
I thought we were doing this every Friday. This is
Not
coming to an end?
indefinitely.
Until we get it right.
There we go. We're getting closer.
This is the only structure in my life.
Well, sorry to risk losing what little structure exists there, Bob. But thanks everybody for doing this on yet another Friday afternoon and the work between meetings. Given short time, we'll go ahead and just probably get started. As a reminder, we're recording these meetings. Bear that in mind. I'm thinking maybe Jeff could have you start and give us an update on, following last Friday's conversation. I think with the elements, at least that we were in agreement with this group, the idea was to move that to Ledge Council to begin drafting. And wondered if you could give us an update on that, and then any other conversations, I think, including you were going to do some outreach to the tribes, the tribal advisory committee members that you hadn't been able to reach yet, and any updates related to that. And then the two elements that I'm thinking we focus on today is the continued conversation around composition of the board. And Paul, we had some conversation about that last Friday, but you weren't able to join us, so I thought it was important to revisit that. And then the other the sort of larger outstanding item that we have not yet really talked through is this concept of protections, which Bob Salinger has put out there. So anything else you all are wanting to discuss today?
Two things. Want to see where we're at with the third-party litigation, and want to see sort of the enforcement end of it. And just thought it would be good to discuss sort of a legislative strategy too, if we have time for it, because it'd be good to get organized around that.
Great, thanks, Bob. Anybody else? Other topics? Okay, Jeff, why don't you give us an update first?
The work that you all have been doing is with Legislative Council now. Malia and the Treasurer's Office, DOJ, and I have a meeting. Oops, my apologies. Have a meeting in, hey, Beth. Excuse me, just a second, guys. Okay, we're going to give this a try now. Sorry. Just a second.
I love Zoom.
Okay.
That reminder that we're all human.
Hey, Jeff, that's the beauty of dogs in the house, man.
Dogs, yeah, that's right. All's good. I went out to the office, but the heat hadn't been on and it was like 30 degrees. So I'm in the living room today. We are meeting with Ledge Council on Tuesday, and so we'll go through it for the first time to kind of make sure they're on track and answer questions they've got. I did do some outreach, ended up speaking with Klutzy, but Mike Kennedy and I have not been able to connect. He's been elusive, but he may actually call me while this meeting's going on to talk a little bit. And Michael Connolly, I have a call into him as well, a little bit around the number 7 on the mission, and and then board composition. So I have feedback on that when the time's right. And we have developed a quick punch list with Department of Justice on they're not technical things, but they are things that you haven't been working on that we will be working on here over the next couple of weeks, related to things like the authority to limit to enforce or enforce against trespass if there's closure of the forest for any particular reasons, from fire danger or whatever. That work needs to be done to make sure the statute covers that. That relates to the authority to charge civil penalties related to trespass. A right to sue to enforce contracts. Income from grants and the capacity for the entity to partner with third-party nonprofits for fundraising purposes, and accept income from things like that. Should there be any fundraising from either the OSU Foundation or another third-party grant-making entity. Let's see. I think those are the big ones. And making sure we've got the expenditure authority really clarified in the language. So Department of Justice is working on those kind of things right now. What else, Peter? Was I supposed to, you want me to report in on the mission stuff, or you want to wait till you're there?
No, I think if you have something on the mission, and then the other piece that was outstanding, and I can pull up the document. I just think it's nice to be able to see each other as well. But was related to sale of carbon credits and/or whether there's a change in language needed there.
We don't have any change in language right now on the carbon credits. Checked in with a couple of folks that do that. They thought that the broad language that was in there covered the bases well enough on that there didn't need to be more specificity than what we had, or different languaging. So that was good news and easily resolved. If you would like to show us the mission statement so that everybody can see number 7, I have one suggested language change based on conversation with the Lutzi representative. The suggestion for number 7 was to include the word contemporary as well as traditional. And so it's a very small suggestion, but it was important in the context of seeking active partnerships with tribal governments in research and demonstration of traditional and contemporary tribal cultural practices and ecological knowledge. So that was the one suggestion that I have from the calls. I don't know if I'll have others after I make contact with our other advisory committee tribal representatives.
Any questions, comments from the advisory committee members?
I'm with it.
Go ahead. Was that Bob?
Yeah, sorry, I got bad connection today. I just said I was fine with it.
All right. Anybody else? Both on this and any of the other updates or elements that Jeff described? Okay.
Just a question out of curiosity, when you're working with legislative council, is that one person, a team of people? Are you assigned to an individual, or how does that roll out?
It is assigned a bill drafter. So there's an individual from legislative council that will stay with the project through to the end.
And maybe briefly, do we want to just, Malia, I think you're still on, and Katie, and I think the two of you, if I understand correctly, have been in communication with Ryan Mann as well about legislative strategy. I wondered if you want to just briefly touch on the approach and what the group here should expect.
Yeah. So as I think we sort of outlined in an email earlier this week, we were going to put together a legislative outreach strategy. think we definitely want to capitalize on the momentum. I know that some of you are, ready and eager to reach out to speak to some of the legislators that you do know. And we want to do that. We just want to make sure that we do that in a coordinated fashion so that, we don't have 5 people reaching out to Pam Marsh, but then nobody reaching out to someone else, that also sits on the Natural Resources Committee, et cetera. So I made a round of phone calls, outreach to each of you this morning. I've heard back from a couple of you and we've sort of gone over the list. I think Paul, Bob, Mark would love to get some time, just 10 minutes or so on the phone to kind of go over a list. We're looking at doing follow-up, obviously, with the House committee that we presented to on Monday. But we're also anticipating potentially taking this to the Senate side in February. So we're looking at that makeup committee and then some of the natural resources, ways and means folks as well. So we have a list of all those folks. I'll run through them with each of you and we'll determine who's going to reach out to who. We'd love to have that happen over the next 2 weeks or so, give or take some time for the holidays to happen. And then we'll go from there. So Mark, I think I'm still actually looking for your number. So maybe if you and I can connect either just after this, then that would be great.
Yeah, I'll put it in chat and then you'll have it.
Great.
So yeah, just trying to leave things open, be prepared for whatever path presents itself in February, because we don't get say over where bills go or whatever. So we just want to be prepared for any outcome.
Thanks, Malia. Katie, anything you'd add?
No, Malia and I just connected today to kind of start those coordination discussions.
Okay.
Do we have any sense of how we played with the committee on Monday? Any more feedback since the end?
I have not heard directly from anyone. Immediately following the committee on Monday, I did send each of those committee members a follow-up email just saying that the department, the university, and the advisory committee has been working on this. I attached a one-pager that is part of the committee record. We sent it in prior to the committee so that the legislators could have an opportunity to look over it if they'd like. So I reattached that, sent it, let them know that we're happy to have follow-up discussions or answer questions at any time. I haven't heard from anyone there specifically other than a very short exchange with David Brock-Smith about looking forward to talking about it in the future.
Thanks, Malia. And thanks for that update, as well as your efforts with Katie and Ryan and others in terms of coordinating legislative outreach. It's really important, really appreciated. All right. So next topic on the list here, I think is composition, and really the question, we can look at the document, but the question in front of you, I think, is one that's been there for some time, which is, do you want to designate seats or not? And I'd really like to bring resolution to that, if at all possible today. And I know there's remained some differences of opinion about whether it's helpful to include a list of, give direction to the land board. So we've settled on land board, non-Senate confirmed appointments to the board, 7 to 9 members, but we need to determine whether we're going to specify in the legislation specific seats. As a reminder, I think, well, I'll let you all speak for yourselves in terms of pros and cons thereof. Is anybody interested in jumping directly in? And if not, Paul, I'm going to ask you maybe to weigh in, since you didn't have a chance to last week.
So I don't get a choice whether I'm going to jump right in. Not that I would anyway. Yeah, talked to Keith a little bit, and it sounded like the direction was kind of to not have assigned interest groups like this committee has, and I just can't wrap my head around that. I just think it's a big mistake to turn our back on 3 years worth of work, something that has worked, and to leave it to chance on who drives this thing after we're done. I just, my fear is to be quite frankly, having sent 7 people out of Metro Portland that get named to the committee, and not having any local input or history with the Elliott. I think that's a scary proposition, and I would hate to see 3 years of my life get turned into something like that. So I think we need to have a continuing influence on what happens with this work.
And yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. I think it'll be helpful for some of the folks that were leaning the other direction to articulate why you were thinking that would be helpful. And as a reminder, the way that the concept is drafted, there's a differentiation between sort of, I think it's called the interim board, that would come between this advisory committee. There would be a period of time that I think largely with the assumption that it's going to be, a group very similar to this, the broader advisory committee that would serve in an interim board capacity, and then ultimately you'd end up with a board of directors. So there is that sort of interim piece. That being said, Keith, Melissa, Bob, Mark, you want to?
I'll jump in. I'm, as I told Paul, I'm comfortable with the language now. 2 things here. I'm comfortable with the language. It seems to indicate that they have to choose. I forget it, Peter. If you could call that up, but it does indicate that there have to be, kind of a wide representative body, and endeavor to appoint members with a full complement of relevant experience and/or expertise in subjects related to the purposes and operations of the Elliott State Research Forest. The land board shall consult with the board, the existing board, and OSU. I think that, for me, that creates a comfort level that I can live with. And like Bob, or like Paul, man, 7 people out of Portland scare me. The other thing that I would like to be considered is that whatever that first board looks like, that they leave in a staggered fashion, and that so there is not so we don't get 4 years, 3 years, whatever that looks like down the line, and there's this wholesale change in the board, which I think would be the bigger mistake. So if that board is, if whatever that original board looks like, and they're between 2 and 5 years or 6 years, and that they are staggered as they leave, I think would serve the Elliott and serve our purposes really well.
Thanks. And I see that Bob Salinger said he supported that idea of staggering the duration. And just Jeff, since I have been tracking edits historically on this document, but we now have a document with Ledge Council, are you willing to track these and ensure that they are transmitted to the necessary person at Ledge Council?
By Peter, I would be happy to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess I would just chime in
Others?
and say I like the language here, and Paul, I hear your concern. I think it seems unlikely. I mean, there could be 7 people from Douglas County too at all, but I really don't think any land board is going to go swing that far left or right one way or the other. And I think the the benefit of not putting the buckets in legislation is we don't really know what the forest is gonna need or want 20 or 30 or 40 years from now. So I like kind of the full complement of relevant experience and expertise as a way to kind of cover those geographic bases. And I mean, I've been disappointed in some of the people that have been appointed to various boards and whatnot, but all of these boards seem to have a fair bit of balance in them.
Present board excluded though, right, Mark?
Yeah, it's heavy to Southwest Oregon for sure.
As it should be.
I wonder if there, I like the language generally, I guess. I think it does leave things fairly open. It says full complement of relevant experience and expertise. And that can be interpreted a number of ways. I mean, we have explicitly described this as a, I think the more clarity there is in the mission, the less concern that is, as long as it's, but you could drive a truck through full complement of relevant experience if somebody wanted to. And so I see the concerns that Paul's raising. Without listing out experience, and specifically from our perspective, having a scientist or scientists on that are thinking about the quality of science and the commitment to long-term research is of course important, but short of starting to list them out, I don't have any better suggestions, but it does, again, I see the concerns. So because 10, 20 years down the road, somebody could say, well, actually, depending on the makeup of the board, it's relevant to be something totally not relevant. I don't know.
I see this language is really, really vague. Relevant experience. I mean, what's that? I mean, my relevant experience or my opinion of what that is to some elected official 20 years down the road might be completely different. They might put the former director of Forest Park on there. I mean, that might be relevant to them, but it sure as heck isn't relevant to me. In my opinion, to the Elliott. It's just
It could be.
I don't know. I think it's a big risk that we're taking by not calling out representatives in the interest groups, and I think more interest groups than experience. I mean, we can't put a bird biologist, we can't put all these specific interests, or expertise, but the interest groups are what I'm concerned about. And that's why what we've done has worked, is because we've had good input from a lot of different sides.
If it read like that, Paul, would that help? If it read yada, 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 an endeavor to appoint members with a full complement of
Stakeholders,
members representing the full complement of interests related to the Elliott and or expertise, blah, 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 blah.
I think the text that Tom just sent explicitly related to the purpose, I think would help.
I didn't see, Tom, but would the word balance in there rather than a full complement, appoint members with a balance of relevant experience and or expertise?
Balance would be a good one to include as well.
I will agree that full complement is pretty nebulous. But if you have, okay, I'll get out of it. I gotta go look at the chat here. So
maybe balance of experience that is explicitly experience and expertise explicitly related to the purposes and operations of the ESP.
Yeah, I think I like that, Tom. We get rid of full complement and just say to appoint members, to an endeavor to appoint members with a balance of relevant experience and expertise. Maybe that it's.
I mean, you could say a balance of interest and perspective if you were trying to address your concern, Paul.
And it is a concern. What we've done has worked, but quite frankly, I mean, this group was appointed heavy to the environmental end of things. I mean, there were two of us from timber, and three from the environmental side. I could see where that could shrink down, and would there be a timber interest at all? And I really think there needs to be. The Elliott is going to be selling timber. And I think there should be someone with that interest in mind.
Peter, I
Yes.
think relevant was, I was arguing for relevant coming out and saying expertise and experience, or experience and expertise explicitly related to the purposes.
Yeah, get rid of and there, just with a balance of interest, experience, and or expertise.
Explicitly related to.
Okay. And I Tom, I think the idea that, and I really think your point about somebody with a research background is important. You know, my solution, as I've said all along, I think that the dean ought to be a voting member here, but I think I'm not sure that
Yes.
I won the day on that. But because there's the person who can represent, you know, research interest. But without that, I think OSU needs to lobby hard in that top line, shall consult with, that research interests need to be included. But again, I mean, I don't know if we're visiting this. Yeah, I guess it's the next line, but I still believe the dean ought to be a voting member.
I completely agree.
So before we move on to the dean's role, let me do a temperature check on the language that's in front of you related to appointments.
I'm, you know, Bob made a point there about explicitly, and again, I think we end up with that vague term again, the sort of thing we were just trying to get rid of. If that's,
Well,
Bob, I didn't read the rest of your directly, perhaps, but it was a little more narrow, but explicit.
I don't care what the word is. The point was just to get at getting away from just relevant and the other sort of wiggle words that were in there, and be explicit that it has to meet the purpose and objectives that are listed in the mission. And I maybe that's obvious, but I don't, the way it was written, it seemed to leave the door open and was vague. And with regard to the, you know, dean being a voting member, if there is no scientist on the panel, then the dean needs to be a voting member. But if there's a commitment to there being people that recognize the long-term, the importance of long-term research, and that being at the core of the purpose, the mission of this entity, then it's less important. And so I'm concerned that if we write this, you know, the membership statement too vague, and I just putting it explicitly doesn't get there either. I get what Bob's saying, but I'm still struggling with how do we specify, those expertise that are needed to address the very issues that are laid out in the mission, and that there's a balance of interests that are presented or present. Maybe we just say that, we refer directly to the mission instead of purposes and, or I don't know.
I don't,
We did, the last sentence there does, I think it was.
Yes, stated mission of the ESRF. Yeah, that's true.
Peter,
I
I feel
think-
like if I had a little bit of quiet, I mean, I don't want to shut down the conversation, but I think that there's some improvements that can be made to the languaging and be very directly to Tom's point. I would be disappointed and surprised if we felt like at the end of the day, there wasn't as much interest in having a representative of research interests on the board as a tribal interest or an operational expertise. I mean, I don't think we are talking past having a research person, a person with a lot of understanding and expertise in research for us sitting as a voting member of the board. I hope we aren't.
Well, I hope not too. I mean, it's a research forest.
It is. This
We
is
need more
remember that-
tribal
Yeah,
voice.
this isn't the Elliott State Forest, it's the Elliott State Research Forest. And if we're creating this, I mean, that's sort of what we're trying to create here, this opportunity for world-class research, and left out, we're missing that.
we need to have a research specialist on the board. My question is, why wouldn't the logical person be the dean of the School of Forestry that is running the forest, that is running the research on this forest? Why wouldn't we name that person?
Because
I
the
guess
board
we're-
has oversight over that person. I think we need to remember here too, that every person has to have a commitment to the mission of the Elliott State Forest, which is a research forest. So, I mean, I think we're getting a little hung up on this specific thing. I think every person has to have a commitment to conservation, to local economies, to research, to the whole complement of, as an underlying provision for being appointed. And then people are going to bring individual areas of expertise or interest. But the foundational thing is a commitment to the success of the Elliott State Forest, which includes all of those things. So my hope would be that we're not appointing people who are myopic in any direction. And I think that's something that you can't really control ultimately. You can write all the provisions you want in there, but if somebody wanted to appoint the director of the forest park in Portland as a quote unquote, timber representative, they could do that. They would look ridiculous, and that would trigger all kinds of repercussions down the road. So, I mean, I think there are checks and balances in here that would keep people from gaming the system that a lot of verbiage doesn't actually do necessarily.
Can anybody not live with the language that's in there right now?
It's not us that have to live with it. It's 20 years down the road that have to live with it. I understand what Bob's saying. I can live with it. I just think that there's a big difference between when we're talking about long-term research, Bob, and the Audubon Society is 100% dependent on long-term research, as are as is every other element of the conservation interests or timber interests. And maintaining long-term research is so hard to do. And that's what makes this really unique. You can look at every, there's forest that is a research forest, and look at the funding stream that maintain those forests, and that they're in jeopardy all the time. Wind River was an earmark for $3 million a year to maintain ecological research in perpetuity. They now get about $60,000 a year from the federal government. And there's having a commitment to long-term research is a unique thing. And that's what is a significant portion of what was undertaken when this group embarked on this idea of converting the Elliott State Forest to an Elliott State Research Forest. And I don't need to have.
I hear you on that, Tom. I mean, and we have spent 2.5 years trying to build a research forest for OSU, and we have gone and testified in support of the research forest.
I know, Bob,
I mean,
and I'm trying to
incredible work here, Tom,
protect
to
that.
support this. But at the end of the day, the most assurance OSU could have had in terms of their research forest was to take ownership of it. That's the
Bob,
bottom line, and they didn't. And so we're trying.
But
to
I
put
think
together
you know
a system that
exactly
actually,
why that is, Bob.
I know
I mean,
exactly why that is. I lived through it, but
I
the
know, and
reality
so
is
did I.
that where we have committed to a research forest, we're passing legislation making it a research forest. It is written throughout this entire document, and I think at the end of the day, none of us can see the future and predict the future per se. The most likely success for this forest to remain a research forest is if it's successful out of the gate, and that it builds momentum and builds confidence. And I don't think you can manufacture that. I think it's going to be that first board and the second board and the third board that get it done, and OSU's competency in managing the forest. And if it goes well, it'll breed success. And if it doesn't, it'll breed dissent. So I just feel like, this document says research all over the place. We have a research platform as a foundational document. Research is built into the HCP. I don't know how much more we can do to give you those assurances at the end of the day. And we are requiring that the board members be demonstrably committed to the mission of the Elliott State Forest. So I feel like we can do here.
Well, I appreciate that, Bob. And I don't want to drag this out any further. There's a lot we could talk about there. There's a lot written into the legislation that puts the long-term research that could put the long-term research at jeopardy, and it's just a matter of solidifying that. And it seems like there is an effort to remove that interest in multiple places. But anyhow, it's a difference of perspective. So for you, it looks like research is everywhere. And for me, I feel like it's understated. So I don't know.
Can I think Bob and I still are not very interested explicitly, but
that's fine.
So how does it balance out if we just say, and I know it's adding an extra word, as well as a demonstrable interest in the success of the stated research mission of the Elliott State Research Forest? Research-based mission.
I think we have a mission statement up top that lists all that stuff. I mean, I guess I just feel like
I know what you're saying, Bob. I really do. I think it's stated, and I think the point you made about it, we've got the HCP
we can move on
in an FMP where research is baked into the cake. I think you're right, and so I'm not disputing that at all. But if two words can increase all of our comfort levels, then I'm
well,
not.
I appreciate it, Keith. I may be overreacting. I'm going back and sort of looking through things and trying to get a sense of.
I guess the other thought I have on this is if you look at the number and composition of the board and whether it's 7 or 9, the only called out position there is the dean of the OSU College of Forestry.
Yeah,
And
non-voting member though.
Yeah, I know, but that means the dean is going to be at the table in all the middle of the conversations, and unless it's a 4-3 vote or a 5-4 vote, I don't know that I mean, I think being non-voting is appropriate, so you keep a little bit of space, separation of church and state, and you don't have the dean approving, large contracts to OSU. I think
Right.
there's an inherent issue there, but I think being called out as it's the sole slot on the board that is designated. So that means the dean and the College of Forestry and Research is going to be right in the middle of all the board conversations.
So I'm gonna revisit my question from a few minutes ago. Can anybody have a problem with the language as it is currently in front of you, knowing that this is going to Ledge Council, they're gonna do their own drafting, and it's
Right.
gonna come back to you, and we're gonna have another round of this. Good enough for now is the question.
Yep.
Good enough for now.
Paul?
I feel like this is a situation where we're trying to figure out what the definition of is. I'm having flashbacks to testimony. It's fine with me. It's fine with me.
Okay.
I hate to pick a fight, but I will say that I think the language is dumb. I think what you're trying to do is designate seats without designating seats. If you want to designate seats, let's designate seats. Because otherwise, I mean, this language, anybody could fit into that. How am I going to demonstrate an interest in the mission of the Elliott State Forest? I'm going to read it and then I'm going to be able to recite it back to you. And I'll say, yeah, there's my demonstrable interest. What we're really dancing around is this question of whether or not we need to designate what these 7 to 9 seats are. And if that's what we're trying to do, then let's take the gloves off and let's designate them.
I think I'm less interested in the designation, Melissa, and more in the balance.
Right, which is where you get the balance, is by
But if you
designating
don't
seats. You
designate,
say
how do you know if
one
they're
trip,
balanced?
one timber, one, county, one this, one that. And then, you can look at it and you can say, yeah, there's balance.
I'm not going to say a word.
We're obviously going around the tree a little bit, because if I'm not mistaken, I think Melissa, at the beginning of the last meeting, you lobbied for not designating any buckets. So
I don't want to designate seats. I'm just trying to make the point that that's what we're getting at. That's this underlying discussion. We can change language around all we want, but what we're talking about, our core argument here, is whether or not seats need to be designated so people are reassured that their interest has a spot. So either we do that or we let this go and be done with it once and for all until we get language back from Legislative Council. But otherwise, that's what's going on. We all want reassurance that our position will be protected.
That's right. And I think so the question in front of everybody is, can you live with a language?
Yep.
It is until something comes back from Ledge Council. You weren't arguing, Melissa, for adding a list of interests, or were you?
I am not.
Okay. And can you live with the language the way it is? Notwithstanding the fact that it's dumb?
As long as you put me on the record as saying it's dumb, and then I'm fine, yes.
All right. Good enough.
And great conversation. Great discussion.
It's
Thanks,
helpful.
I've been told I do dumb well.
All right.
Okay, maybe that's the one designation we have. We designate a dumb and dumber seat on the board. And we'll let it all shake out, right?
Good. And then we will also add something related to this initial board of directors being staggered. And it's, I assume Jeff or others who have more experience in this, that initial is an ambiguous term, and I'm not sure how long that initial period lasts and whether we need to specify that, but it is a
We
question.
can, it dawned on me as you all were having the last conversation, we've not specified it. We could. We could also just use other boards, other entities have been established and as a model and have 2, 3, 4, 5 year, 2, 3, and 4 year terms set up so that that it gets off to the right start and then stays staggered in the replacement of the permanent board. And we have also not addressed how many terms, what the duration of a term is and how many terms a board member can serve. So if we don't do it here, it'll happen in the legislative language and it'll come back to you and you can discuss whether you like it or hate it there. Either way.
Anybody want to advocate for the time duration of terms and or how many?
I'd advocate only this, that board members, if we're talking about 4 or 5 year terms, the option to hang on it for 2 terms seems to make sense to me. For longer terms, continuity is an important thing in boards like this and in sort of a collective memory. And I think that there's going to be this sense of that in the original board. But after that, it gets lost a little bit. And so that's the longer we can stretch that out, I think the better off the Elliott is.
My suggestion would be 3-year terms, split whatever the board is into thirds, have each one term out every 3 years, and put a 3 or a 4 term limit on it. I guarantee you, well, yeah, that's a long time to commit.
Yeah, it is.
But
My single experience was when we were launching the OWEB board, when the statute created OWEB in '99. And I think like a lot of the other natural resource boards, they were 4-year terms. There might be some that are 3. And we established with a renewal for one additional term. And they were out of the gate. Some members were set for 2 years, some were set for 3, some were set for 4, just to kind of get it started and rolling. I think Legislative Council probably have a suggestion so that to avoid the perpetual turning over of the board, because I think you want a board to be able to operate for some amount of time to be cohesive and not always have the cycle running. But it's not too far off from what I just heard you all saying. So shall we just come back to you with something that's close to what you're talking about and see how it fits?
Yep. I think that's fine. They've got the legislative experience with that. I'm fine with that.
Works for me.
Sounds good.
Okay. Malia and I will work on it with them.
So we have 10 minutes remaining. And the other topic we have not really spent a lot of time talking about is what's currently a track change final component of the ledge concept, and it's titled protections. And I think Bob, Salinger, you suggested it. I don't think that we're going to get to resolution, certainly on language related to whether there should be protections included here or not. I do think it would be valuable to have just a few minutes to talk a little bit about sort of how folks are thinking about that category. And because it was put in there by Bob, it relates to conservation. There may be I'm not trying to assume that that's the only protection that might be included. But are there things that need to be additional elements that need to be codified here, or folks would like to be codified? And if so, what are the principles that should, undergird your thinking related to this, or alleged counsel's thinking as they, consider this, or you all consider it?
Explain the protections here. What I missed that.
Let me pull up the document here, Keith, and Bob, I'm going to ask you to speak to what you were suggesting be included here, if you will, while I pull that up.
Let's see what you have there so I can see if I can speak to it. A couple of things, I guess. One, and some of this has been not all my thinking, some of it's just sort of evolved from the discussion, but one is just that the Elliott State Forest will not shrink. It can get bigger, but it can't shrink. And two, there was interest in making sure that the reserves truly do stay reserves. We don't have boundaries on those because we haven't done the FMP yet, but there was an interest in seeing if we could get the habitat locked in, especially on the 35,000 or 34,000 acre reserve, which is being sold to the public as, the largest reserve in the Coast Range. So you can see, and I don't think this is my language, but you can see what the language has been translated into here.
I don't have a problem with that, with the larger conservation section, the 30-some thousand, 34,000 acres being, or whatever that final acreage looks like. I mean, 0.6 and whatever breaks down to. I don't have a problem. That's been part of our discussion all along. I think, Bob, I'm going to say it's going to be difficult, when you start to go beyond that, in the sense that while it will be the intent to match as science develops, or as research develops, to match an acre for acre, square foot for square foot exchange. If you said, okay, this area, we're going to change the way we do our research. It's going to go from extensive to intensive, and something else is going to change. I'm not sure you can actually match that down to pure acreage. But I don't want to upset that, but I think on the larger set aside, I think that makes sense, that we've baked that in. All right, I use the term again. We've baked that in. It's been part of our discussion, and I don't have a problem with that. I'm not sure I like the idea of. I mean, I don't know, Bob, and you can help me out here, and Tom. The idea of saying that the Elliott State's Research Forest shall never shrink, and I don't know what happens if you have. We're talking about events 50 years hence, and a fire, and the opportunity to exchange lands, maybe in one part of the Elliott for lands in another part of the Elliott, or adjacent to the Elliott, excuse me, and that I hate to bake that in and say, well, we can't do that because it's not, because we're missing a few feet or a few yards, or so in that regard, I don't mind. I think you're right on the larger chunk, but I think the intent is to, again, we've baked into the cake that there's going to be these conservation and protected areas, and I think we can trust that will work. But in terms of preventing, I think we get too nitpicky what's going to happen 50 or 60 years hence. We don't know, right? And I think we'll have to, I don't know how you word that any differently. I know where you're going, Bob, but especially on the larger area, I think you're right. That should remain is with all, for all intents and purposes, a conservation area.
Well, what if that larger area
Burns?
There proves to be something that was thought to be there that isn't there, that it was reserved for, and what if in one of the areas that's set aside for something else, that something pops up that warrants being in a reserve? That ties the hands in the future to make smart, productive decisions. And I just I think that's a mistake. I understand what you're trying to provide is certainty, but I think those are decisions that need to be left to people in 20, 40 years from now.
Okay.
I think it's a mistake to tie future decision makers' hands like that.
I agree, Paul. I think it's better to just, state who has to make that decision.
Yep.
And in most cases, I see these as things that the state land board would have to decide.
I think, Peggy put a comment in the comment box, which I think is important. We're hearing it from a lot of folks, and I agree with it. I think that the public is putting 120, well, probably got to put 221 million into the forest, and that we, I think part of the expectation was that would result in permanent protections on a portion of the forest. That was the big argument for doing that. And so I think we've got to grapple with that a little bit. I think the question I have is whether the HCP is sufficient for that, because the HCP actually does start to lock in acres and things like that to a large degree, and whether the legislation actually adds anything to that, or, given the fact that we don't have lines on a map yet, that it's so vague that it really doesn't, it's kind of meaningless language at the end of the day. It's just not precise enough to actually do anything. But I do think there is a question from the public that we do need to grapple with around what that $220 million really bought in terms of conservation benefit.
Well, my public is asking what guarantees they've got of harvest.
Bingo.
And research.
And
Recreation. And
And
recreation.
recreation.
Maybe we should put the research in here. I think that's what I heard Bob say. It's missing.
Let's not go another round there, but this was a good tip of the iceberg kind of conversation on this topic. I think we'll need to revisit it. Appreciate everybody's willingness to engage on the earlier parts of the conversation and document. I do think we're close to having a clean version for them to be working on. Jeff, we're gonna assume you're gonna transmit the suggested modifications here, and I can work with you on that, make sure you have everything. I do want to say Colin Beck from the Kuti tribe asked to join this group going forward, so we're going to include him on that future meetings, and he wasn't able to join today, but excited to have him be a part of the conversations, and as well as the advisory committee, obviously. Anything else? I held you over last time, so I want to make sure I get you out on time today.
Well, I'm dying to know what activities we're going to prohibit.
What?
Boy, that's a
Is that for me?
Are we?
Whoever added that, I would like to know what activities you're contemplating prohibiting out there.
I think that was me, right?
Yeah, that was you.
I think it was you.
I was actually interested in uploading some of the provisions in the research platform. There's a bunch of specificity in there around a number of things, what kind of development can be in there, that kind of stuff.
Right.
What kind of activities that usually does actually make it into enabling language. So I don't think it's inappropriate. I wasn't planning on adding anything new that wasn't already agreed upon, but I do think there is certainly precedent for putting in sort of the kinds of activities, whether they're environmentally oriented or not, that are actually explicitly prohibited. And then, you can go back through the FMP or sorry, the research platform and find them. But there's several in there that actually are very specific and clear.
Yeah, I wasn't saying it was inappropriate, Bob. I just was very curious as to what those might be.
There were provisions or in there that are explicit around the different kinds of development. There's something in there about mining. There's something in there. There's stuff in there about herbicides. There's stuff in there about cell towers. Although I think cell towers are actually an allowed use. So, I don't remember all off the top of my head, but
Okay.
I was talking about mining the research platform, not coming up with a new list of prohibited activities. I don't know.
Okay.
And I think they can go through and decide whether that's appropriate or not, but
Would it help if we did some of that mining with OSU out of the research proposal and came back to the group with some material?
Was
Tom
that
and I-
pun intended?
Say that again, Paul.
Yeah,
I said,
a
was
little
that
bit.
pun intended?
It's 4 o'clock on Friday, so I'm not sure if I intended it or I just tolerated it, but
You guys are getting as bad as I am.
anyway, I would, if it would help advance the conversation, I'd be happy to kind of take a grab at it with Tom's help in as neutral a way as we can think of doing it to advance the conversation.
Sure. That sounds good. Jeff.
Okay.
Thanks. Helpful.
Yep. Yes.
I have a 4 o'clock actually.
Sorry for you, Tom.
Yeah, no, you guys are you set or are you good for the evening?
I think we are done. I'm done with you all. You can do whatever you wish for the remainder of your workday and or weekend.
Okay.
I have a 4 o'clock also, so talk to you guys
Okay.
next week.
And
Thanks,
we will
Peter.
plan to schedule something a few weeks out when we have a sense of when there will be actual language to review with you, but not bother you until then. But we'll try to get something on the calendar sooner rather than later.
No
Okay.
post-Thanksgiving meeting?
No post-Thanksgiving meeting.
Oh,
Geez.
darn it.
Not on Friday
All right.
afternoon.
Damn it.
Happy
All right.
Thanksgiving, everyone.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for
everyone.
your work on this,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.